Alright, you're taking a look at the Unit 1 Part 2 notes. Going to continue on with information covered in class. These are the actual notes to begin with, so that we can get to some of the ideas that are in the Constitution. Where did they come from? We start with where democracy originated from. Democracy comes from ancient Greece, specifically Athens. In ancient Athens, they have a direct democracy. Direct democracy is characterized by the fact that all citizens have a vote directly upon every matter that comes before the government system. So they also get to debate freely at those times. The direct democracy works with a small population over a small area. The Romans realized that democracy worked. However, they were much too large for it to work, so they improve upon the direct democracy system created in ancient Greece, and they create what's known as a representative democracy. Specifically, they're the ones that come up with the idea of a republic. A republic is a little different in that it's supposed to be characterized by large groups of people, which are usually characterized in themselves by living in a certain area or a piece of land. Think of it like having individual states or regions or counties, something along those lines. And it's supposed to be each of those regions that are put forward into the central government, and they represent the people back within their region. And then the central government operates on the basis that there's an understanding that the people that are represented in the central government from the specific regions are there to represent their regions, and that the central government will always preserve the rights of the individual back in each individual region. Ideas that come directly from the Enlightenment. We focus on Thomas Hobbes, who wrote his classic book called Leviathan. Hobbes, like some earlier academic people, believed that all people were guided by and given natural rights, that the universe was governed by natural law. What this means is that every person has a right to life, liberty, and to some degree property. Hobbes doesn't stress property nearly as much as Locke does a little bit later on. Hobbes believed that the natural state of people was very animalistic, and that if we were left to our own devices, we'd probably kill each other and crawl on all fours. But in order to protect ourselves from ourselves, people would give up a little bit of their own rights and form government. And according to Hobbes, this would make us stand upright and walk like, well, people, I guess. This is known as the social contract theory, that people will give up some of the rights that they naturally have in order to form a government, so that their other natural rights, life, liberty, and to an extent property, could be preserved. Locke, our second Enlightenment guy here, improves upon Hobbes. Hobbes is very pessimistic. Locke could be looked at as optimistic. Locke's famous writing is the Treatise of Civil Government. There's two. The second treatise of civil government is the one that we focus on. He agreed with Hobbes about a lot of things, that people are born with natural rights. Natural rights include life, liberty, and then he adds in property and stresses it a little bit more. Locke agreed with Hobbes, again, that government is there to protect our natural rights of life, liberty, and property. He also agrees and expands upon the idea of a social contract theory. Locke takes it a little bit further and says that in our contract with government, that if government should go too far and infringe upon our natural rights too much, we should break the contract, and it could be violently if it was necessary. However, Locke thinks it takes a lot in order to violate the social contract, and he believes that you shouldn't break the contract as an individual unless your natural rights are deeply affected, and then you can act violently. What a wimp. So how do these things move to the writing of the Constitution? Well, you got to do a little bit of history quickly. Let's talk American Revolution. This country starts out as 13 original colonies, all coming from Great Britain. Most of the colonies are centered along the eastern seaboard. For the most part, the colonies were pretty autonomous. They didn't have to listen to England. Communication wasn't the best. There was no internet. There was no electricity. I know it's hard to fathom. The King and Parliament left pretty much everything in the colonies up to the colonies, everything except their foreign policy. So the colonies couldn't deal with individual countries on their own. And trade, all trade, it was raw materials go to England to be processed there. The trade was solely with England, not anyone else. Eventually you have the French and Indian War, which the British win thanks to the colonists. And the French and Indian War turns out to be quite costly. Because it's so costly, England decides to impose taxes, higher taxes, on the English colonies. The colonists are a little upset by this. It's not so much about the taxes, it's the fact that they have to pay increased taxes, but they were never represented. Their opinion was never heard before the taxes were put out there. This bothers the colonists because they feel that they had natural rights before this time, life, liberty, property, that kind of thing. The colonists will eventually respond with a Declaration of Independence, and of course, before the Declaration of Independence, you know all the other things, like the Boston Tea Party, blockade of certain ports and bays that really stopped trade from the colonies to Europe. The colonists meet with the First Continental Congress in September of 1774. At that First Continental Congress, basically they address the idea that they are being taxed without representation. And there is very little sentiment within the colonies to declare independence from Britain. They're mad, but they're not so mad that they want to break from Britain. It basically takes about a year and a half of non-stop work until they can get enough people to agree to go to war. Once they do, you know what happens on July 4th, 1776. Declaration of Independence is signed. Its main author is Thomas Jefferson. The Declaration itself is very impassioned. It really expresses the feelings of the people within the colonies that they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. And it lists their reasons for declaring independence. It justifies the fact that they are about to go to war with a parent country that really, when you compare the numbers, they're being taxed at a much lower rate than people within England that has their parent country has treated them rather well, but certain people, certain politicians within the colonies have convinced the people war is the way to go. During the Revolutionary War, the colonies become states. They align themselves together. They form a very loose national government, and it is the rules for that national government are expressed in something called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation holds the states together through the Revolutionary War, but it has a ton of weaknesses, and they become very apparent after the war. Some of the weaknesses are that the legislature only had one house. This takes away from a system of checks and balances. They could, if they had enough power, they could go out and seize power and be a very authoritarian government. Another issue is that although the states get to send up to 7 delegates, I'm skipping to number 3 here, they only get one vote each state, and that is another issue because some states have a much greater population than other states do. This is a huge problem because the issues of large population states versus small population states are very different from one another. The Articles of Confederation is dominated by state rights and not an overall idea of the nation being most important and then filtering down to the states. Moving forward, other weaknesses. The Continental Congress is the name of the central legislative body under the Articles of Confederation. And a huge weakness, you can see at number 4 highlighted in red, is that they have no power to actually tax or regulate commerce. Regulating commerce results in tax. The big problem with this is they can't develop a strong national economy. If you can't develop a strong national economy, your central government doesn't have any power. Overall, your country is weak. And that leaves the states standing all by themselves. No one in Europe is going to recognize them if they're not strong. Finally, last set of weaknesses, under the Articles of Confederation, the states have no president and no national court system. In dealing with this, the major problem with this is the fact that as a new nation, a new recognized nation, the United States of America, you're going to have your growing pains like any new nation does, and there is no central body to handle these things. No dealing with foreign countries and creating treaties with foreign countries, trade between states, rights and the recognition of rights between states. These are all problems that a national government usually addresses. Not to mention the issue of defense. And remember, every country, its government has a responsibility to provide protection. So, in 1786, representatives from 5 different states meet in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. The weaknesses are really brought to light by an event known as Shays' Rebellion, where Daniel Shays, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, who's actually a farmer, has his property foreclosed on, and many of the people that he fought in the Revolutionary War with are also having their farms and land foreclosed on. And this is an issue. The reason that they're having their land foreclosed on is because they never got paid for fighting in the Revolutionary War. They never got paid because the central government couldn't raise taxes to get money to actually pay them. Since only 5 states actually send people to the Annapolis Convention, nothing really gets done except for the fact that those representatives, and there's 12 of them total, they agreed that there should be another convention, another big meeting to discuss this Articles of Confederation issue. So you have the Philadelphia Convention, or what is commonly called the Constitutional Convention. 12 out of the 13 states actually send delegates. Rhode Island doesn't really send anyone because they are the central banking state of all the states. They stand the most to lose. In attendance, you have the great General George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, who will end up creating the first bank and the overall banking system that we still use in the United States. James Madison, a young, wealthy individual who will one day become President of the United States. And of course, Benjamin Franklin, even though he's 81 years old. Absent from the Philadelphia Convention, Thomas Jefferson, the writer, author of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams is also absent, who is a big supporter of the Declaration of Independence. Probably the 2 biggest names missing are Patrick Henry, who decides not to go to the Philadelphia Convention because he sees the writing on the wall ahead of time. He knows that this isn't going to simply be a restructuring of the Articles of Confederation, which he supported. He knows, he can see it by the people that are going. He knows that this is going to be a complete rewrite of the entire government system in the United States. And Samuel Adams is left out. Massachusetts doesn't even send him. He's a little too radical for their thought. He is totally against a strong central government, and he would probably hold up the works. So he's never really invited, which is odd considering he is one of the top politicians of the time. All the delegates attending the Constitutional Convention bring their ideas that they already know. Key among them are ideas from Locke, things like the social contract theory, the idea of natural rights. Another idea, consent of the governed, which comes from the social contract theory, which is also referred to as popular sovereignty nowadays, is an idea that many of the delegates of the Constitutional Convention have on their mind when thinking about creating a new government. And the idea of limited government, which also comes from social contract theory, which is placing restrictions on the government, which helps protect our natural rights. The people at the Philadelphia Convention are a group of 55 men, and it's all men, and they come from a high economic standing place in society, and they're also politically connected. They're politicians through and through. All of them are wealthy and in the upper class. The majority of them are college graduates, which is rare for the time period, and almost every single one of them lives along the coast or in an urban area, and this is a problem when you consider that a little over 50% of the United States is quite rural at the time. There are significant differences between urban settings and rural settings, as you well know, And this really is the beginning of issues that will come to light during the Civil War, but that's for your U.S. history classes.